I'm back. Welcome to the late evening or early evening presentation that we're going to have this evening. That you will not be disappointed. Dr. Robert Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist with a specific focus in the field of neuroendocrinology. His extensive research and clinical practice has focused in the areas of childhood obesity and diabetes. He has authored numerous scientific publications and is a New York Times best-selling author. Further additional details and information can also be seen in his bio on the conference webpage. Dr. Lustig, welcome, and you need to share with us your personal fun fact. Your fun fact.
Oh my God, my fun fact. My fun fact is that once upon a time, I was going to give up medicine to become a wine sommelier. And I came really close. Maybe it was a good thing I didn't, because otherwise I probably wouldn't be standing up here. I'd probably be at some, highfalutin, thing in New York City instead. So I'm with you. So first of all, welcome. I want to thank Tim and his staff for putting on this, really remarkable event, and really for leading the field of culinary medicine. There would be no culinary medicine without Tim. So how about a hand applause for And I will tell you that Tim is my cohort in crime, as I will show you a little bit later on in the talk. My wife affectionately calls him Tim the Ice Cream Man. And the reason is because he has spent more time concocting ice cream in his garage for a project that we have been working on that I will show you in a moment. But his creations are now on the market in the Middle East, and I will show you that. All right, so the true purpose of nutrition. What is it? What is the true purpose of nutrition? I'm going to tell you. So here's how I want you to think. First of all, recognizing there are some people with graduate medical degrees, there are some people with nutrition backgrounds, there are some people who just like to cook in the room. So we've got a big breadth and depth of experience. So I'm going to try to do this as simply as I can from a science standpoint. So the physicians who came, for hardcore science, we can talk later, okay? So each of you is the recipient by God of this gorgeous fire cherry red Ferrari here in the left-hand corner. There's only one small problem. It came without a warranty and it came without an owner's manual. And your job is to keep that red Ferrari in tip-top working condition, lest it become that jalopy in the bottom right. Okay? That's the true purpose of nutrition when it comes right down to it. But it goes a little bit further, deeper than that. But we're going to use the car analogy because everybody sort of understands it. Okay. This is not working. Now it's working. Okay, first. So disclosures. I did write these books for the general public. I also am the chief medical officer of a few companies, one of which you're going to hear about at the end because it relates to the science, and it's called Biolumin. I'm a paid advisor to some other companies, an unpaid advisor to Kuwaiti Danish Dairy, and you're going to hear about that as well during the course of the talk, and that's where Tim and I have been working, okay? Okay, sorry, here we go. All right, so this is a paper that came out in the year 2001 based on 2000 data. And what it said was that at that time, 2000, there were 151 million people with diabetes stalking the earth. And what it predicted for 10 years later, 1 decade later, 2010, was that that number would increase up to 221 million. That's a 46% increase, or as the actuaries do it, an annualized inflation rate of 3.88%. That is not what we saw. What we actually saw was that there were 285 million. That was an increase of 6.55%, a doubling over what was anticipated. By 2014, we were up to 422 million. That's a tripling over what was anticipated. And this is while the obesity epidemic is raging, okay? And everybody and his brother is, worried about, their cholesterol and their LDL and, obesity and gym memberships and what have you. Okay? By 2019, we were up to 463 million. And now what is anticipated for 2030 is 568 million, and by 2050, 785 million people with diabetes. And this is knowing what the problem is, or do we? This is the issue. Okay. Now, if you take a look at where the money goes, so in red, that's hospital costs. In green, that's physician costs. In purple, that's pharma costs. They do not add up to the total cost of healthcare because the rest of it is going to the care and treatment of chronic metabolic disease, like diabetes, like dementia, etc. Okay? We have to solve this problem because there's not enough money in the till. Now, if you take a look at health expenditure on the x-axis against life expectancy on the y-axis, you can see for all the OECD countries, the 37 developed countries, they're all sort of keeping track of each other. But take a look at America. I mean, we just have friggin' fallen off the rails, okay? We have gotten now to the point where no matter how much money we spend, life expectancy goes down. That's where we are. For 5 years in a row, we have not been able to solve this problem and turn this around. And we're not going to until we actually fix something. Now, if you take a look at a country that's doing well, Japan, and you look at, and you earmark that, and you look at our country, how we're doing compared to Japan, every single person in this room is paying an 8-year longevity tax to Japan. And if you have obesity, 15 years, and if you have metabolic syndrome, 20 years. All of that could be recouped, okay? And all of that could be recouped as good health span, not just lifespan, if we did what the Japanese did. Okay, well, what are they doing? Well, here's the problem. 93% of Americans have at least one form of metabolic dysfunction, at least some aspect of metabolic derangement that is contributing to that 8-year longevity tax. Only 7% of Americans are in good metabolic health. And compared to Japan, where it's more like 65% are in good metabolic health. Now, it didn't used to be that way, but the Japanese have actually instituted policies and procedures within employers and within government to turn that around. So that number is not just out of the blue. It's not genetic. They fixed it. We didn't. And if you just take a look at health expenditure against life expectancy, again, you can see just how far apart we are. Okay. And of course, because all the money's going down the tubes, Medicare will be broke by the year 2026 and Social Security will be broke by the year 2034. And I'll be very honest with you, okay? I'm gonna be 69 in 2026 and I want my friggin' Medicare. I worked hard for it. Okay, and you did too, and it won't be there for you because of this, because we haven't solved this problem. The question is, okay, what is the problem? And what did Japan do right? So this is my favorite Dilbert. Anybody still read Dilbert? I mean, I know Scott Adams is on the outs, but I love this one. Health problems and absenteeism are a huge cost to this business. So give me a raise or I'll eat unhealthy food and avoid all forms of exercise. You already do those things. How could you possibly know that? Because everyone does, that's why. Okay, and here's the reason. Because everyone is waiting for the pill. Okay, I am here to tell you there is no pill. Maybe a shot? No, there's not even a shot. Okay, there's not even a shot. And we can talk about that later. Okay. Here's the problem in one slide. The definitions. Everything revolves around the definitions. There are 3 different definitions, and they get conglomerated together, and people don't understand what they actually mean. So I'm here to define them for you, because a lot of people misuse them. Number one, food science. That's what happens to food between the ground and the mouth. Nutrition. That's what happens to food between the mouth and the cell. Metabolic health is what happens inside the cell. Everybody got the difference? They are not the same, are they? Okay? But it turns out that it's only what happens inside the cell that leads to disease. There are many things that happen outside the cell, like for instance on your tongue, but what happens inside the cell is what ultimately leads to disease. And that's where the problem is. So metabolic health is actually the goal. Nutrition is only valuable as it informs metabolic health, but it is one step divorced from it. Food science is only valuable as it informs metabolic health, and it is two steps divorced from it. So in order for you to do culinary medicine, you have to assume that metabolic health is the goal. And I'm not the only one who said that. The World Economic Forum actually put out a white paper, which I contributed to, basically saying that, in fact, the goal of nutrition is metabolic health. That's what it's for. Okay? All right? So what's that? What's metabolic health? That's what the rest of this talk is about. And this is where the car analogy will come in very valuable. Okay? So let's start with the problems. Remember, I told you, no warranty, no owner's manual. This is the owner's manual. I can't give you the warranty, but I can give you the owner's manual. There are 8, count them, 8 subcellular pathologies that are going on inside your cells right now that are going to kill you. The only question is when. They're going to kill you today, they're going to kill you tomorrow, or they're going to kill you, hopefully, 80 years from now. And if you ultimately take care of these 8 things, you will be 110 playing tennis. If you don't take care of these 8, you will be 40 years old on a gurney with 2 stumps on dialysis waiting for your next stroke, or anything in between. And so the question is, where do you want to be, and what are the 8 so you know what you should do about them? Everybody with me so far? All right, so what are they? First, glycation. Glycation is when a glucose molecule binds to a protein, but it could be a fructose molecule binding to a protein, or it could be even some other molecule binding to a protein. What happens is the protein becomes less flexible, and it also gives off a reactive oxygen species, and we'll go there in just a minute. This would be like carbon deposits on your intake manifolds. You know that's bad for you, right? You know you have to go clean those every once in a while. Number 2, rusting. Rusting of the body, rusting of the chassis. Not good, right? Number 3, mitochondrial dysfunction. That would be like having a defective transmission. Anybody ever driven with a problem transmission? You know you don't want to do that. Number 4, insulin resistance. That would be like having a sticky carburetor. So when you step on the pedal, it's supposed to go vroom, vroom. Instead, it goes put, put. That's insulin resistance. Number 5, membrane integrity. That would be like an oil leak. Number 6 would be inflammation, would be like rotted fuel lines, which could catch fire. You ever see a fire under the hood of, car pulled to the side? Okay, that was a rotted fuel line that rotted all the way through. Number 7, methylation. That would be like gunk building up on the spark plugs, so that instead of running a V8, you're running a V2. And finally, number 8, autophagy. That's like oil sludge, okay? Again, something you can do something about, but do you? Everybody with me so far? These are the 8 things you're trying to avoid, and if it's your car, you do it, but if it's your body, you don't. Think about it. So, what causes these 8? Here's your list. Take a picture. Go ahead. All right? Fine, no problem. Okay, it's not proprietary. Okay, so everyone gets it. Okay, but if you take a look at all the things that cause all the 8 things, they're all food. What isn't? What's not food? So glycation is due to carbohydrate, fructose, and lack of fiber. Oxidative stress is due to glucose, fructose, and trans fats. Mitochondrial dysfunction is due to fructose omega-6s, trans fats, lack of micronutrients. Insulin resistance due to fructose branched-chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine. So you think those are good, and they are good if you're laying down muscle. If you're not laying down muscle, then those get turned to fat. Number 5, membrane integrity. That's due to lack of omega-3s. Number 6, inflammation, carbohydrate and gluten in some. Omega-6 is fructose and lack of fiber. Methylation, lack of folic acid, B6 and B12. And finally, autophagy, frequent feeding, lack of fiber. In other words, it's all food. So none of these 8 things have a drug. They're not druggable. There is no drug. There is no pill. There is no pill. There never will be a pill, because these are all signs of mitochondrial dysfunction, and there's no medicine that gets to the mitochondria. That's the key. That's the nugget of truth you have to walk away from today. These are all mitochondrial diseases. Chronic disease is mitochondrial disease, and there's no medicine that gets to the mitochondria. The only thing that gets to the mitochondria is food. The problem is, what kind of food? And that's why you're here at Culinary Medicine, to find that out. All right? They're all foodable. Now, there are those of you in the room who will say, yeah, but I run 7 miles a day. I don't really have to worry about any of these. Well, exercise is the second best thing you can do for yourself. I'm not against exercise. I'm for it. But when you actually look at what exercise does, it only ameliorates 4 of these hateful 8. And here are the 4 that are not amenable to exercise. So what this means is you cannot outrun a bad diet. Okay? Everybody got it? It's the food, people, and the data actually show it. I could show you the data on studies looking at food, diet versus exercise in terms of mitigation of chronic metabolic disease. The R value for diet is 0.65, so a 35% reduction when you eat properly. And the R value for exercise in cardiometabolic risk reduction, the R value is 0.75, so 25%. So yeah, they both work, but which one works better? The food. And bottom line is, these are the 8 things that food fixes. Okay, everybody with me so far? I could go home now, but we'll keep going. Here's the food that doesn't work. It's called ultra-processed food. So the question is, if ultra-processed food is food, it should work, except who said it was food? Is ultra-processed food actually food? Anybody know? Well, in order to answer that question, you actually have to know the definition of food. Okay, this is culinary medicine. What is the definition of food? Straight from the dictionary, come on. What is the definition of food? A little challenge here. Come on, a quiz. Well, here it is, right from the dictionary. Substrate that contributes to either growth or burning of an organism. That's exactly right, 100%. Growth or burning. So anything that passes your lips that contributes to growth is food. Anything that contributes to burning is food. Agreed. Okay, so let's look at ultra-processed food. So ultra-processed food, as you know, the marker for ultra-processed food is sugar, because sugar is in 73% of the items in the American grocery store, because the food industry put it there on purpose, for its purposes, not for yours, right? Okay. Well, turns out that sugar is made up of 2 molecules, glucose and fructose. You've heard that, right? Glucose and fructose. 1 molecule glucose, 1 molecule fructose. Now, glucose turns out to actually be a mitochondrial stimulant. It actually increases the efficiency and the output of mitochondria in terms of ATP generation. It increases 2 enzymes that are necessary for normal mitochondrial function. One's called AMP kinase, which is the fuel gauge on the liver cell, telling the liver cell to make more mitochondria, make fresher mitochondria, which is good, more ATP. And it also increases this enzyme down here on the right called HADH, hydroxyacyl-CoA dehydrogenase, which is necessary to cleave 2 carbon fragments so that they can be burned by mitochondria. Everybody with me so far? So glucose, for lack of a better word, we can call good. Fructose, on the other hand, this sweet molecule in sugar, the molecule we seek because it's the molecule that is addictive, inhibits three, count them, three separate enzymes involved in normal mitochondrial function. It inhibits AMP kinase. It inhibits this enzyme down here on the bottom left called ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain. And it inhibits the one in the center there called CPT1A, carnitine palmityl transferase 1A, the enzyme that regenerates carnitine, which is the shuttle mechanism for getting fats into the mitochondria for oxidation. The sum total of which is that fructose actually decreases mitochondrial function. Well, if something decreases mitochondrial function, is it contributing to burning? It's the opposite. It's actually inhibiting burning. Okay, let's go to growth. So this is work from my colleague, Dr. Efrat Monsonigo Ornan at Hebrew University, Jerusalem. She's the head of the Department of Nutrition there. And what she did was she looked at ultra-processed food as it affects bone growth. And here you can see you can see the white, translucency of the bones of the femur of these animals that after consuming ultra-processed food on the top left. You can see the cortical porosity. You can see the hollowed out marrow on the bottom left. You can see the fracture risk there in the upper center. You can see the actual fracture load that will take to break it. And you can see how ultra-processed food affects that. And at the top, you can actually see the lack of bone. The red is the bone on the cortical bone. And you can see it's gone from the ultra-processed food bone. And you can see just how wide those trabeculae are in the bottom right. Bottom line is, you're not contributing to growth, you are inhibiting growth. If anything, you are hijacking growth because fructose actually stimulates cancer cell growth. So if you're not contributing to burning and you're not contributing to growth, are you a food? Well, if you're not a food, what are you? You are a toxin. In fact, fructose is a chronic dose-dependent hepatotoxin. Okay, just like alcohol. Whoops, sorry. Let's go back. All right, so here's just a sampling of all the things that ultra-processed food has been associated with. Okay, oh, we're already on there. Okay, so metabolic syndrome, hopefully you were watching. I can't go backward. Okay, Crohn's disease, cancer, dementia, depression. Depression's an important one. We're going to go there in a minute. And finally, of course, early death. And all the data support this. Meta-analyses, right, left, and forward, all show that ultra-processed food consumption contributes to reduction in health span and reduction in lifespan. And that is the thing that Japan has done differently than us. When they realized the problems of ultra-processed food, they did something about it. We didn't. We actually doubled down and made it worse. That's what we did. Okay? Depression, teen depression, everybody's got depression nowadays. Why is that? Well, what is the treatment for depression? Serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? So serotonin matters. Well, what's the precursor to serotonin? Tryptophan. Tryptophan is the rarest amino acid in the diet. Very little of it. Okay? And it turns out when you have metabolic syndrome, the tryptophan doesn't get converted to serotonin, it gets converted to this inactive metabolite called kyurenine, so it's actually depriving your brain of even more serotonin. So the bottom line is, it's no surprise that ultra-processed food's contributing to depression. And it's not just contributing, it is a primary cause. And these data demonstrate that. So globally, ultra-processed food consumption drives chronic depression. Whoops, what the? That's interesting. Holy Land linking, wow. Okay, that's a special one. Are we being hacked by something else? Where'd that come from? Any idea? That just appeared out of the blue, right? So I like to do it off my computer. I told them that earlier, but oh well. If you want, I got my computer here. linking. What's going on? Well, let me see if I can go back to where I was. So the bottom line is depression, all of these metabolic derangements are all due to mitochondrial ATP generation in whatever organ you're looking at. Ah, there we go, thank you, whatever that was about. Okay, and you can see on the left, okay, not related to exercise, it's its own primary causative variable, and on the right, as you can see, it's not related to income. Okay, so it's not just poor people, it's everybody. Okay. So let's define ultra-processed food. Now, there are different ways to define it. We use the NOVA system. You're probably familiar with that. It's come under attack by the food industry, mind you, not by anybody else, but by the food industry for obvious reasons, okay? So how do you define the NOVA system? The easiest way is with an example. So there are 4 classes. NOVA class 1 is an apple picked off a tree. NOVA class 2 would be apple slices, de-stemmed, de-seeded, maybe de-skinned. NOVA class 3 would be apple sauce, cooked, macerated, possibly with a preservative thrown in, maybe with added sugar, hopefully not. And NOVA class 4 would be a McDonald's apple pie. So the question is, how much NOVA class 1 apple is actually in the NOVA class 4 apple pie? And only McDonald's knows for sure, unless you do some DNA footprinting to find out. Point is that only NOVA class 4 correlates with chronic disease. The other, no signal at all. But NOVA class 4, that's where all the signal is. Ultra-processed food is the problem. And it is 73% of the American grocery store. And ultra-processed food is tasty and addictive on top of it, okay? So, ultra-processed food going up in the UK, going up in the US. We know all this. This is old news to you. The food industry will tell you that ultra-processed food is necessary. And they're actually right. It is necessary. It is necessary because we're going to have to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050, and we're not going to have enough land and ocean to do it. We have to find some way to mitigate food waste, and the only way to do it is to actually ultra-process it. So there is some truth to that, but not for the reasons they say. They say it's because it goes in nutritious diets. Garbage. Total, complete trash. I, on the other hand, say processed food is an experiment that failed. It was an experiment that we didn't sign up for, was foisted upon us back in the 60s to 70s. We never signed an informed consent for it. Okay, and we have demonstrated very clearly that it is not working. But that's what we're left with, and it ain't going away. Next slide. So here's the most important slide of this entire culinary medicine symposium. This is it. How many times I've sat in talks today, and really for the last 5 years, with people saying food is medicine. Food is medicine. How many times have you heard that today? A few times? Yeah? I'm here to tell you food can be medicine. Food can also be poison. And the trick is knowing which is which and helping your patients understand why they have to avoid the poison that tastes so good, because it is poison. That's really the trick of culinary medicine. So why are we in this mess? Well, in fact, the US government is the reason we're in this mess. Okay? And here's the top 10 list, you know, the Letterman top 10 list of what the US government did to put us in this position today. All right? So don't think it was your patients, okay? It was our federal government. They could get us out of it too, just like Japan did, if they wanted to. They don't want to. And I know that because I just testified to Congress 2 weeks ago. And I'll tell you about that later. So, you know, the very first thing, the sugar tariff. 1790, the second oldest piece of legislation in the post-Constitution, in the history of America, and it's still in place today. We're still paying more for sugar because to keep other people out. Okay? The problem is that the price of sugar has still dropped so much that it's able to be put in anything, and high fructose corn syrup, you know, just jacked that up like crazy. Next, the Dust Bowl. So everybody familiar with the Dust Bowl? It came at the same time as the Depression. So we had all the food in the Northeast, and we had a destitute population in the Southwest, and we had to get food to them. Well, if we just put the food on railroad cars and sent it to the Southwest, it would be rancid by the time it got there. So what did they do? They packaged it up, they took the fiber out, they ultra-processed it, they put them in 10-pound bags of flour, shipped it to the Southwest, baked it up on site, and we saved an entire American population. And that made perfect sense back in 1933, even made perfect sense all the way through World War II. But then it stopped making sense. And that's one of those things that should have been retired. But hey, food industry found they could make money on it. So we doubled down, and we've doubled down a few more times since. Okay. Number 3, Cuba, the fall of Batista, okay? Anybody ever heard of US Crystals or Florida Crystals? The Fonhul brothers? Well, they give money equally to Democrats and Republicans, okay? And you know, Cory Booker is on the Agriculture and the Nutrition Committee of the Senate, okay? The very first trip he took was on the Fonhul's yacht, okay, when he became a US Senator. So we got to be very careful here. Now, 1971, okay? Richard Nixon, you know, very paranoid. He believed that fluctuating food prices caused political unrest. And he had a whole lot of political unrest to deal with, as you remember. And so he admonished his Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz, Rusty Butz, that's his name, to make food cheap. And so he went out to the heartland, to Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa, and he said 3 things: row to row, furrow to furrow, get bigger, get out. And that's what started monoculture. That's why all the corn's in Iowa and all the cattle are in Kansas. The problem is when the corn's in Iowa, you have to use ammonium fertilizer, which then, of course, causes global warming. And the cows in Kansas, they don't get all the legumes and the alfalfa and clover that they need. They're just eating corn, so they become nutritionally deficient, so they get sick, so they need antibiotics in order to just stay alive. And so now we've got this vicious cycle of antibiotic use, toxic water, algae blooms, and climate change because of the food. 1977, the dietary guidelines, the very first dietary guidelines, okay? Where'd that come from? It came from the mind of a Mormon. That's where it came from. It came from a guy named Nick Motern, and he was all about eating less meat. That was what he wanted. He wanted us to eat less meat. And so what do you eat instead? 1980. This was a hurricane that didn't hit America. It hit the Caribbean. It destroyed the Caribbean sugar crop. And at that same time, high fructose corn syrup had been introduced to the United States, and Coca-Cola and PepsiCo said, there's something wrong with this stuff. We can't put our finger on it. And I know because I am good friends with a guy whose father worked for Firmenich, the flavor company, who was in charge of this high fructose corn syrup. And he said that they got all sorts of flack from the soda companies. But then Hurricane Allen destroyed the Caribbean sugar crop, and all the beverage companies said, where are we going to get our sugar from? And that's what let the floodgates in for high fructose corn syrup. And of course, you know, that culminated in 1985 with New Coke. Familiar? Is this story, you know, resonating? Okay, I'm not making this crap up. Okay. 1986, the FDA actually evaluates sugar for toxicity. And the problem was that the guy who ran the analysis, okay, went to work for the Corn Refiners Association immediately thereafter. That's number one. Number two, it was all based on 1980 data or before, and that was before high fructose corn hit our shores. And so the mean consumption was at 51 grams. We went up to 104 grams right after it. And so, you know, it almost doesn't even matter. But they declared it inconclusive, and the sugar industry said, see, no problem, you know, kind of like, you know, Trump and Robert Mueller. Okay. 1990, the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act of 1990. That's what gave us the nutrition facts label. Okay. Have you ever noticed that there is a percent daily value for everything on there? Protein, salt, fats, etc., but there's none for sugar? That's on purpose. That's on purpose. Because they don't want you to know how much is in it. 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. And this is what basically gave us, all of these dietary supplements that are, have flooded the market, because you don't have to prove efficacy. The only way to take a dietary supplement off the market is for them to get sued. And finally, 1997, the Food Safety Modernization Act. This is what privatized the generally recognized as safe list. So once upon a time, in 1958, the GRAS list consisted of 170 items. Today, there are 10,000 items on the GRAS list. You really think there are 10,000 things you can put in your body that won't kill you? Really? All right, you get the idea? So we're set up. This is a setup, people. All right? And you need to understand that, because you need to teach this to your patients, because that's one of the things that will help them get over the addiction hump. And of course, this has societal consequences, especially in terms of money. So if you take a look here on the right, okay, $9 trillion globally to the food industry in profit. But it's $11 trillion in healthcare costs cleaning up their mess, $7 trillion in environmental costs cleaning up their mess, and $1 trillion in productivity costs. So in fact, there is a $10 trillion deficit every single year because of ultra-processed food and our response to it. This is unsustainable. We have to fix this. But we're not going to be able to fix it as long as people think it's about calories, it's about, everyone gets their choice, et cetera, et cetera. So how can we promote metabolic health? Well, we have to do two things. We have to promote metabolism, that is mitochondrial function, and we have to inhibit inflammation. All right, those are the two things we have to do. So, healthy. What does healthy mean? Nobody knows. Not even the USDA, not at the FDA. There's no definition of healthy. Michael Pollan said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. By the way, Michael's a friend. He's been to my house for dinner. Very nice guy. Okay, but I totally disagree with this. Okay, 3 clauses, they're all wrong. Eat food. Okay, well, some people need a high-fat diet, some people need a low-fat diet. What does food mean? And is ultra-processed food food? Number 2, not too much. That doesn't take into account this mitochondrial dysfunction we're talking about. And finally, number 3, mostly plants. Hate to tell you, but Coke, Doritos, and Oreos are all vegan. Because all food is inherently good, it's what we do to the food that's not. That's the key. And that's what culinary medicine is about. It's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food. And if you stick to the stuff that came out of the ground or the animals that ate what came out of the ground, you are good to go. That's the key. Okay? In my book, Metabolical, I suggest 3 different principles. And Tim is a co-author of these 3 different principles because we have published this. It is called the Metabolic Matrix. And you can take a picture of this too. Okay? And there are 3 precepts. Okay? Protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. Any food that does those 3 things, processed or ultra-processed or not, is healthy. Any food that does none of the 3 things is poison, by definition. Any food that does 1 or 2 but not all 3 will be somewhere in the middle. And the reason these 3 is because the studies show that if you fix these 3, all the other organs downstream of them will get better. Whereas if you fix the other organs, these 3 won't. So these 3 are primary. These are the ones you actually have to pay attention to. Gut, liver, brain. So feed the gut, what does that mean? Well, the gut does a whole bunch of things, right? Okay. Fiber is the food for the gut. Feed the gut. Feed the gut fiber, because fiber is food for the bacteria. So you have 100 trillion bacteria in your intestine. You have 10 trillion cells in your body. You have 100 trillion bacteria in your intestine. Your bacteria outnumber you 10 to 1. They got to eat something. Well, what do they eat? Well, they eat what you eat. The question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? You know how when someone's pregnant, we always say, well, you're eating for 2? Well, we're always eating for 100 trillion. Okay? And you got to support them. Okay, well, what do they eat? They eat fiber. They eat what you don't, what you can't absorb. You can't absorb fiber, they can. That's their job. All right? Well, when you give them ultra-processed or fiberless food, you are starving them. And the thing is, if you don't feed your bacteria will feed on you. Because they will strip the mucin layer, the protective, in pink there, the protective layer that's covers the intestinal epithelial cells. And when that happens, now you've got apposition of bacteria right on the intestinal epithelial cell. And that's what leads to inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, leaky gut, etc., which ultimately leads to systemic inflammation. Okay? So you've got to maintain the mucin layer by giving the bacteria the fiber they need. So far, so good? Turns out consumption of fiber improves every chronic metabolic disease. All-cause mortality, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, you pick it. And the reason is because it does 6 things. And remember, there's soluble and insoluble. You need both. Okay? One or the other is not enough. You need both. Both are in real food. Ultra-processed food, sometimes they'll add fiber 1, like fiber 1 bars. What is that? That's inulin or psyllium or pectin. Not enough. Soluble fiber is good, but it's not enough. The reason is because soluble fiber alone will only do 2 of the 6 things that fiber together will do. It will feed the intestinal microbiome, and it will turn into short-chain fatty acids. Now, that's good. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's only 2 out of the 6. Insoluble fiber alone, that would be like eating cardboard, okay? You're not doing that. No one's figured out how to put insoluble fiber back into food. That's part of the problem we're going to talk about. And so that'll induce the satiety signal sooner, remove cancer cells from the colon. So you get 2 different things, but you get 6 when you do the 2 together, but you only get that in real food. Okay? So, whole grain. Everybody familiar with the concept of whole grain? No, you're not. You don't even know, do you know that there's no definition of whole grain? So how can you be familiar with the concept if there's no definition? Huh? Okay, think about that. So the USDA basically says you can call something whole grain if you started with whole grain. If it started with whole grain before you processed it, you can still call it whole grain. As soon as you pulverize it, it ain't whole, is it? Okay? The starch is out of the husk. That husk was necessary because the starch is on the inside, the husk is on the outside. That makes absorption slow. That makes it hard for the enzymes in your intestine to strip the fiber off the endosperm. And that means that the starch will go further down the intestine, where it will ultimately be metabolized by the microbiome instead of absorbed by you. Because if it's absorbed by you, it's just going to your liver and it's going to cause problems. So in fact, whole grain matters, but we don't have any, okay? Because they've done something to it. Think of it this way. If you take a wheat berry, 25% of the weight of that wheat berry is the fiber's husk, right? So the way to figure out if something is whole grain or not is to look at the carbohydrate to fiber ratio on the side of the package. If that carbohydrate to fiber ratio is 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, or even up to 5 to 1, yeah, maybe there's whole grain in there. But that's not what you're buying at the store. You're buying 8 to 1, 9 to 1, 10 to 1, 20 to 1. That means something's been done to it no matter what it says. So bottom line, if it says whole grain, it probably isn't, and if it doesn't say whole grain, it definitely isn't. Okay? Number 2, protect the liver. Protect the liver from what? From toxins. Now, your liver is your toxin detoxification organ, true, but it has a limit. It has an upper limit. It can't go past it, all right? It has a ceiling. And if you provide toxins in excess of what it can do, you will do liver damage. And that's what's happening. So I will show you that to you. This will be the second most important slide I will show you. What we see here are called MRI fat fraction maps, so that you can see the fat really easily. So on the left, you see an obese person. Notice the love handles on the side. But take a look at that guy's liver, 2.6% liver fat. This is normal. This is a metabolically healthy obese person, MHO. We actually study these people to figure out how come they didn't get sick. And the reason they didn't get sick is because their liver is okay. This guy will outlive you, despite the fact that he's obese. Now let's take a look at the guy in the center. Notice, same obesity, but look at his liver, 24% liver fat, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That guy's going to die. That guy's got metabolic syndrome. That guy's got liver mitochondrial dysfunction. Now take a look at the guy on the right. Notice, no obesity, normal amounts of sub-Q fat in the sides. But take a look at his liver, 23% liver fat. Thin sick, fat healthy. So it's not the fat you can see that counts. It's the fat you can't see. So all these people running around with GLP-1s for obesity, you know what they're doing? They're fixing the fat they can see, not the fat they can't. That's why I said, it ain't the shot. It ain't the shot. Because for metabolic health, it's the liver fat and the visceral fat that matter, and that's not what the drug is treating. So why? Because fructose and glucose are different. Because glucose goes to glycogen in the liver on the left, and fructose goes to the mitochondria, overwhelms them, and gets thrown off as triglyceride, as fat, on the right. That's why. This is the phenomenon called de novo lipogenesis, new fat making, and fructose is the primary lipogenic substrate. The other one is alcohol. And fructose and alcohol do the same thing in the liver and cause the same diseases. And that's why children today get the two diseases of alcohol, type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease, without drinking alcohol, because they have a substitute that does the same thing because it's metabolized the same way. So should it be any surprise that children today get the diseases of alcohol without alcohol? Come on. This is not rocket science. We showed this at UCSF very clearly. We took 43 children from our clinic with metabolic syndrome, Latino and African American, all high sugar consumers. And we studied them on their home diet. And then we catered their meals to be no added sugar for 10 days. Okay? We took the percent calories as added sugar from 28% of calories down to 10% of calories. We gave them fruit. But all the other food was chosen for them to be no added sugar. Now, if you do that, you're going to lose 350 to 400 calories out of the diet every day, in which case, after 10 days, you might lose weight. We didn't want our patients to lose weight, because if they lost weight, then the critics would say, well, of course they got better, they lost weight. We didn't want them to lose weight. So we had to add the 350 to 400 calories back as something equicaloric. We gave them starch. We gave them extra starch, okay? In the vernacular. We took the pastries out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. So we didn't give them good food, we gave them crappy food. We gave them Safeway food, okay? But it was food kids would eat, but it was no added sugar food. And we gave them a scale, and every day they'd go home and we'd call them up on the phone, what'd you weigh? And if they were losing weight, eat more! In order to keep their weight constant or even higher, in order to mitigate the question of weight loss. And then we studied them again 10 days later. And here's what we found. Liver fat down 22%, de novo lipogenesis down 46%, VLDL, triglyceride, down 49%, visceral fat down 7%, and most importantly, their pancreases started working again. So there we go, improved insulin kinetics. We reversed their metabolic syndrome with no change in calories and no change in weight, because it's not about the calories and it's not about the weight. It's about the metabolic dysfunction. And when you improve their metabolic health, they get better because we took the toxin out of their diet. Okay? Well, there are other ways the toxins get in. They get in through the intestine. Everybody familiar with this concept of tight junctions? Probably you all heard of leaky gut. Okay, the celiac disease, the zonulins, the proteins that basically bind one cell to the other. Okay, well, those tight junctions can become dysfunctional, it turns out. What makes those tight junctions dysfunctional? What do you think? Oops, sugar. Sugar nitrates those tight junction proteins, rendering them ineffective. And so when they're supposed to be tight, they're not. And bad stuff can get in, and then that bad stuff ends up in the liver, and you're off to the races with chronic metabolic disease. And finally, there's a third barrier in the intestine. It's the immunologic barrier. They're called Th17 cells on the left here, and they're maintaining the immunologic barrier against all sorts of junk that could enter from the intestine. And you can notice that on the right side, the Th17 cells are still there, even though it's a ketogenic diet. So everybody says, oh yeah, ketogenic diet raises your LDL. Yeah, it does, but it keeps your intestine patent and intact and working. In the middle is the cafeteria diet, and look what happens: the breakdown, the inflammation, and the Th17 cells, they're gone. Now we got Th1 cells, which are causing problems. So 3 different barriers in the intestine: the physical barrier, the mucin layer, the biochemical barrier, the tight junctions, and finally the immunologic barrier, all made worse by ultra-processed food, all made worse by sugar. Okay? In fact, sugar consumption makes autoimmune disease worse. Shown here, lupus erythematosus. And you can see why, because fructose is a preferred substrate for streptococcus, and streptococcus is the reason for lupus. Okay? It's not a bacterial disease, it's an anti-idiotypic disease, but based on a streptococcus protein. So anything that makes streptococcus grow is going to make lupus worse. Glucose turns out not to be. Glucose is not a preferred substrate for streptococcus. By the way, anybody know what tooth decay is? That's streptococcus in the mouth. Same thing. Sugar causes it, starch doesn't, for the same reason. So feeding your streptococcus is not necessarily such a good thing, and they really love fructose. And it's not like it's just tooth decay and liver decay. It might be, in fact, cancer, and it might be Alzheimer's too. We're working on those. Okay? And of course, sugar's in everything, right? It's in the soft drinks, of course. It's in the candy cakes, ice cream, of course. But it's also in, that's only 51% of the added sugar in the diet. The rest of it is in stuff you didn't know had it, like, bread, like yogurt, like bean dip, I mean, all the way through. People don't know they're consuming it. And there are 262 names for sugar, and you don't know them. And the food industry uses all of them, because that way they can hide the sugar in plain sight. Did you know that panocha is sugar? Did you know evaporated cane juice? That one you better know. That's what they use in yogurt to make it, quote, give it a health halo. And finally, number 3, support the brain. Okay, support the brain. Well, what's your brain made of? Oops, sorry. What's your brain made of? It's made of fat. Okay, so we all told to go low fat back in 1977. Really brilliant. Okay, absolutely brilliant. Okay, who was in charge of that? Some what do you call it? Mormon. That's who. Okay, Nick Motern, who was McGovern's chief of staff. Okay, that's who did it. Okay. So you have these things called omega-6s, you have these things called omega-3s. They are not the same either. Omega-3s, as it turns out, are anti-inflammatory. They make all sorts of good things called DHA and EPA. These are things that improve neuronal structure and neuronal function and also contribute to cardiovascular protection. On the other hand, on the other side, you have omega-6s, and they're the precursors for arachidonic acid, which is the precursor to thromboxanes, leukotrienes, and eicosanoids. Okay, all the bad stuff, all the thing that causes inflammation. So you're supposed to have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about 1 to 1 to maybe 3 to 1. Ours is 20 to 25 to 1 because we don't eat fish. And actually, if we do eat fish, it's farmed fish. And what do you feed the fish? You feed them corn, and that's omega-6s. So farmed fish is a problem. So middle of the country, big problem, because that's where they're getting their fish from. Omega-3s have been shown to alleviate depression, and if you do omega-3s and exercise, you can reverse depression. Okay, and ADD too, by the way, sorry. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, this is, yeah, okay. There we go. Nope, now it's going in the wrong direction. Okay, and ADD, by the way, and ADD, for the same reasons. Okay, all right. Okay, and brain-selective nutrients, zinc and selenium, very important. And get rid of the cadmium. Okay, good. Next. This is not going well. Okay, finally. So the metabolic matrix, this protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain, actually tells us what we need to do. And this is what metabolic health is about. These are the 4 precepts. More soluble and insoluble fiber to protect to feed the gut. Less fructose to protect the liver. More omega-3s to support the brain. And lastly, less emulsifiers. And emulsifiers are not in real food. They are only in ultra-processed food because they hold fat and water together. Everybody familiar with emulsifiers? So what are emulsifiers? They have a nonpolar end on one side. They have a polar end on the other side. They are detergents. That's what you put in your clothes washer. That's what Tide is. It's an emulsifier. So what happens when you swallow Tide? You go to the emergency room, right? Same thing. All right. We're doing something about it. We have this thing called Eat Real, a nonprofit in the Bay Area dedicated to getting real food into K-12 all over the country. We're in 7 states currently, aiming for 10 this year, and in 600 schools, we have already gotten rid of 1 million pounds of sugar from California schools in 2 years. Oops, sorry. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, and we have been acknowledged by the White House. Almost done, Tim. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Now, as I said, processed food's not going away. And we really don't even want it to go away because we're actually going to have a famine. And so the obesity problem will take care of itself because we're not going to have enough land and ocean. So we actually have to figure out how to mitigate the metabolic risk. And the answer is there are many ways that technology could be applied to this. I'm going to show you one. Okay? Again, this is what Tim and I worked on. This is the paper that we published in Frontiers in Nutrition last year on the metabolic matrix, and we have been applying it to a food company in the Middle East called Kuwaiti Danish Dairy. And they now, we've looked at all of these by biochemical analysis using high performance liquid chromatography to actually know what was in their food, both when they purchased it from the vendors and when they processed it into their own food. And we have come up with new recipes for them. In fact, do you see the re-engineered ice cream recipe over there on the right? That is Tim Harlan's ice cream recipe right there. Okay, and it is on the shelves in Kuwait today. And you can't taste it today because it's only there, but it would spoil before we get here. So the question, one of the big issues is sugar reduction. How do you get rid of the sugar in the food? Well, there are 5 principles. You could remove it with enzymatic techniques. You could reduce it with nanofiltration. You could replace it with non-nutritive sweeteners, which is what most people are doing because that's easy. And it's just kind of a swap. You could boost it with layering techniques. I don't know if you heard about this silica surrounded by fructose. It's called Dumatok or Incredo. Or you could block it, and that's what I've been working on. So full disclosure, I am the chief medical officer of a corporation called Biolumin that makes a proprietary fiber that sequesters glucose, fructose, sucrose, simple starches, and renders them unavailable for absorption. We were written up in The Guardian. As I told you, fiber matters. Well, we're putting the fiber back in. So you swallow it, it goes into your stomach, expands 80-fold over its original size, gives you a feeling of fullness, and the nooks and the crannies are impregnated with a set of proprietary hydrogels, soluble fiber, that soak up and sequester all of those simple sugars, the mono and disaccharides and simple carbohydrates, rendering them unavailable for absorption, carrying them further down the intestine. So you get a lower glucose response, a lower insulin response, and you feed the microbiome. And then the microbiome makes short-chain fatty acids. So this is what it looks like. It starts with a dietary supplement. This is what happens in the stomach. This is what happens in the intestine. Okay, and it works at different parts of the intestine to do different things, just like regular fiber does. All we're doing here is recapitulating the effects of fiber that the food industry took out. All we're doing is turning apple juice back into apples in the intestine. That's it. Okay, when you think about it that way, it sounds a whole lot safer and better. We tested it in an in vitro system here in Belgium, and what we saw, big problem with this thing. We saw that we could sequester 36% of the glucose, 38% of the fructose, 40% of the sucrose, 9% of the simple starches, and most importantly, very little extra gas. So very little in the way of side effects. So this is what the glucose curve looks like when you eat a candy bar in black and when you eat a candy bar with the compound in red. And you can see a 20% attenuation in peak glucose. You can see a faster return to normal, and notice no reactive hypoglycemia at 75 minutes. Cool. Okay. And this is just a compendium of the 2 clinical trials that we've done so far: reductions in fasting glucose, insulin resistance, blood pressure, body fat, and improvements in muscle mass, HDL, stool consistency, butyrate, gut health, and satiety. And no side effects. Not one person in either study stopped taking it because of side effects. In fact, if they had GI problems, biolumin made it go away. If they had diarrhea, on biolumin they didn't. If they had constipation, on biolumin they didn't. If they had abdominal pain, on biolumin they didn't. Because we're giving them back what they need. The fiber. Remember, if you don't eat your fiber, the fiber will, if you don't feed your bacteria, bacteria will feed on you. Here's the change in insulin and glucose with biolumin in blue versus placebo in orange, an improvement in each case. So, last slide. So what I've hopefully shown you is that metabolic health is a complex concept. Protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. You can do that for a patient, but that's not enough. We have to be able to do it for a community. We have to be able to do it for society. Ultimately, we have to be able to do it for the planet. And that means that we have to do one public health intervention, one population at a time, personal intervention, one patient at a time, which is what you're going to do. And finally, technological innovation, one company at a time. That's what I'm doing. So with that, I'll close.